Hello and welcome to the Following Truth Bible Study. As always, I am your host, LJ. In this video, we're going to be looking at, is Jesus a copy of pagan gods? And specifically in this study, we're going to look at, is Jesus a copy of the pagan god Horus? If you are new here, please subscribe. It does help the channel. Please give it a thumbs up if you like it. If you subscribe, obviously, it'll allow you to be kept up to date when I go live, and you'll get a notification if you accept notifications on your YouTube. So whenever I go live, it helps, obviously, you know when I am. So in this study, we are going to be specifically looking at the Jesus Horus claim that Jesus is a copy of the pagan god Horus, and that Jesus wasn't a literal human being that lived. So this comes a lot from mythicists who will argue using this kind of claim. Now, I'm going to be using a lot of slides in this, so hopefully I've set them up correctly, and that this is going to be quite easy for you to be able to follow along in being able to do visuals. So hopefully that will be quite easy. I've got a couple of websites that I want to go to as well. That might I need to change screens on the platform, so that might take me a second to change, but hopefully the slides that I've created will just go through, and I've created them in order, which will make it a lot easier, but I haven't actually had time to go through and check them all, so hopefully they're in order, but we shall see. Hello, Doki. Thank you very much for coming and joining today and watching this study. I hope it's going to be useful. As always, if you disagree, that's fine. I'm only trying to present the evidence that I've looked at. If somebody else has different evidence, then that's fine. I'm always open to having a look at the evidence. But this is the evidence that I'm going to present in this particular study. And if people disagree, they disagree. If they agree, then even better. But as always, I'm happy to have a discussion with anybody about this particular subject. It is one that kind of separates a lot of kind of atheists, obviously, and Christians. And I'm sure that I'm going to get straight into showing some slides. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this kind of meme that you'll find on Facebook, or kind of used against Christians. And also, please bear in mind, if I do disappear for a couple of seconds, it is because my internet is still playing up, and I will be back. So please bear with me on that basis. It should only... So if it does cut out, then hopefully it will only be for a short period of time before coming back on. So yeah, on YouTube, you'll probably on YouTube videos, on Facebook, you'll often see memes like this. Look familiar? This is Horus. He is one of the many pre-Jesus solar gods, and as you can see here, Horus is, or the supposed Horus is on a cross being crucified, and this is one of the arguments against the real story of Jesus, and that it's actually just a copy of myths, and Jesus didn't actually exist. But if he did exist, it's the stories have been added to him, and they don't actually depict the real story of Jesus. Horus, the original; Jesus, the European copycat. So this is the kind of things that you'll see on YouTube, on Facebook, being posted about to disprove and show that Jesus is not who Christians claim that he is. Thank you, Doki. I'm glad that you like. Hopefully, I'm going to present something for Christians. Obviously, they understand that maybe, the things that are claimed about these other gods. We obviously believe the things that we say about Jesus, that Jesus was, the Son of God. He was crucified, he died and rose after 3 days. We believe that as Christians, but maybe as Christians you haven't. Thank you very much, Doki. Much appreciated. Maybe as Christians you get these types of memes and stuff, and you don't know how to argue against it, even though you know that it's incorrect, or you know that Jesus is those are those things, and what we say about them are true. But what about the things that they say about these other gods? Are they true? How true are they? So that's why I'm doing this particular subject, is so to give Christians a better argument, or even if you don't want to argue against it, but to have more confidence in your own faith. And that's the purpose of these kind of studies that I try to do. So we all know, we've probably seen these. I get these quite a lot. So these kind of things sent to me as well, to prove that what I believe is false. And these are the types of arguments that are used against me. So there is a film. It was released in 2007. So let's go back a second. So the accusation is that is made against the biblical narrative, that it's stolen from the ancient sources, and that it is simply a copy of the much older mythological stories of gods of ancient empires, such as the Egyptians and the Greeks. Now, one specific argument revolves around this story about Jesus. It is claimed that the narrative of his birth, the life, the death, and subsequent resurrection mimics that of the earlier stories told about the mythological deities, such as Horus, Attis, Mithra, Krishna, to name just a few. The argument is used to prove that Jesus either did not exist, which is what mythicists believe, or that the stories about his actual life were added to him at a later date. Even if he did exist, these stories were added to him because they are copying these mythological characters that come from these other ancient religions. Now, anyone who is familiar with this film, this is a popular 2007. I'm not going to play the video now, but I'm going to do that in a future video. I'm going to go through the video again, but I won't do it in this particular video. But if you've seen that film, it's a 2007 YouTube movie called Zeitgeist. It's directed by a man called Peter Joseph, and if you've seen this film, you'll be well aware of the arguments that are made in it. So the film is made in 3 parts, and it's part 1 that is what we're going to look at. The film that we're going to that part of the film we're going to focus on. The film, so part 1 is particularly about the Jesus story, and the film lists a whole load of deities and makes claims regarding the similarities between their stories and the stories about Jesus. So in this study, I'm going to deal with those claims regarding Horus. It's not for me. I don't need to disprove all of them. regarding all the deities. One will suffice. What we'll see is that actually what we can use against Horus, we can actually use against the vast majority of these deities, and the vast majority of these deities, the claims are exactly the same. So I'm going to worry about one. Now, should time permit or the need arise, I will address the other gods in another study. So let's look at the claims made by the movie regarding the similarities between Jesus and the story of Horus. So in the film, it states, Horus, born on the 25th of December, born of a virgin, star in the east, adored by 3 kings, teacher at 12, baptized, ministry at 30, 12 disciples, performed miracles such as healing the sick and walked on water, known by the truth, the light, God's anointed son, the good shepherd and the Lamb of God, betrayed by Typhon, crucified, dead for 3 days, and resurrected. That sounds very, very similar, doesn't it? It sounds similar to the Jesus story. Now, it's impossible to really just ignore these similarities between Horus and Jesus and say they have no consequence at all. That would be naive, I think, and it's likely to come across as being in denial that, oh, your God is, the story about Jesus and your God and stuff is it's all copy, and you're just denying it because you're just ignoring the facts that we've presented. At least those that are taken in by the claims make this type of accusation anyway. So how do we reconcile these similarities? Do they actually demonstrate that Jesus is nothing more than a retelling of the mythological tale of Horus? Firstly, it must be noted that similarities do not demand dependency. Just because 2 narratives are similar, it does not necessitate that one story would be dependent on the other. It would have to be demonstrated by way of evidence that one was, in fact, based on the other one. However, even in that case, it would then need to be demonstrated through evidence which story was dependent on which. Thus, it would have to be demonstrated that it was the story of Jesus that was dependent upon the story of Horus for these claims to be true. Secondly, it must also be noted that the film offers no evidence for these claims. The film simply makes the claims and presents them in a manner as if they are fact. So there is an argument made by the late great Christopher Hitchens. He was an atheist, but I actually really liked listening to his arguments. I thought he was brilliant. It's known as Hitchens' razor, and it simply states that claims made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Now, obviously, as I say, Christopher Hitchens was an atheist, didn't believe in God. His brother, Peter, is a Christian, and they actually debated each other once, which was a fascinating debate. So unlike people like Richard Dawkins, I actually have a lot of respect for Christopher Hitchens, regardless of whether he was an atheist or not. I have a lot of his books, and I really liked listening to his mind, even if I disagreed with him. I did. See, that's one thing. There's no problem with listening to people that you disagree with. It doesn't mean that they're bad people or that they're wrong. You're right. There's nothing wrong with listening to other people, and I really enjoyed listening to him. And it's a shame that he's gone. But so while these claims about Horus are indeed on the surface at least, very similar to the stories about Jesus, without evidence to support them, they can simply be dismissed without any evidence. Evidence is required to support such claims. It is very easy to simply make a claim. Claims are made all the time. However, it is not so easy to back those claims up with actual evidence. And it's impossible to do so if there is no evidence on which the claim is made. So, where does Zeitgeist get these facts from that it lists in about Horus, and how factual are they? So the claims are made in a number of books that they've used as source guides. So one of them is, so they're based on the writings of Dorothy Milne Murdoch, who writes under the pseudonym Acaria S. Now, Acaria S has written many books, including The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold. And that's where she's written under Acaria S. But she's also written the one on the left side there, which is Christ in Egypt. But she wrote that under Dorothy Milne Murdoch, or DM Murdoch, which is what she's called herself there. So that's the same person, the lady in the picture, basically. She's written the Christ in Egypt and the Christ Conspiracy. And she's also, and it was also based on the books by Gerald Massey, which is the one on the right-hand side, which is Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World, and that's parts 1 and 2. So these are basically these are the main sources of where the Zeitgeist gets these, and you will find so they're fascinating books. They're not small books. I mean, she's put effort into writing these books. There's a lot of information in them, a lot of false information, and Gerald Massey's book is even bigger. You know, it's a huge book. It's actually 2 books in one in there. It's parts 1 and 2, but there's a lot of information inside of these books. So it's not as if these people haven't put any effort into writing their these fanciful stories that they've come up with. Now you will find the claims as listed in the book, in the film, on page 115 of The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold. Now that's the claims. That's double page. This is the full page. Hopefully you will be able to kind of see that. I know it's not massive there, but let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. No, that is as big as it will go. Those are the sizes of the slides. Okay. You might not be able to quite see that, but basically it's the claims that we've already seen made in that film, and they're just listed out on the page. So it's vitally important that we examine in the claims made and test the evidence that supports them. So this video is basically part 1, and I will do more, but I'm going to focus specifically on the 25th of December and the virgin birth. So I will, otherwise it's going to get too long. So I will do the crucifixion and the death, burial, and resurrection of Horus. But what you'll see in this video is how those claims are actually made, and how realistic they are. And then you'll go, well, you know, we know how they're going to make those claims regarding the other list, the further list of what is stated about Horus. So you'll just see what happens and what they have to do in order to make these claims. So the first claim is that Horus was born on the 25th of December, thus being asserted shares a birthday with Jesus. Again, it must be reiterated that a similarity does not demand dependency, nor would it necessitate which one was the dependent and which one was the origin. However, we will address this similarity. So, when it comes to the birth date of Jesus, it should be noted that the Bible does not specifically state when Jesus was born anywhere in the text. We are never told that Jesus was born on the 25th of December. In fact, the Bible gives no specific day for the birth of Jesus at all. There is nothing written in Scripture, in the Gospels, the Epistles, or the Old Testament regarding any specific date. This date, the 25th of December, therefore, is not a biblically attested to date, and thus simply makes the argument against the biblical accounts, so we're talking about the biblical story for the birth of Jesus, null and void. The Bible doesn't state it. So, was Jesus born on the 25th of December? Now, of course, today, the commonly held date for the celebration of the birth of Jesus is the 25th of December. This, however, does not in any way prove that Jesus was, in fact, born on this date. All this actually shows is that at some point, the 25th of December has become the commonly accepted date on which the celebration of the birth of Jesus occurs. It does not prove that Jesus was, in reality, born on this day. In actuality, we just do not know for certain when exactly Jesus was born. If the birth date of Jesus was that important to the narrative, it would be stated in the biblical text. We would not need to make guesses or make best estimates of when Jesus was born. So, there were, in fact, many different dates postulated for the birth of Jesus throughout the history of the early church. The Theophany. Epiphanius, writing in the late 4th century, around 375 AD, gives us the date of the Nativity of the evening of the 5th and beginning of the 6th of January. And he states, "For Christ was born in the month of January, that is, on the 8th before the Ides of January." Now, in the Roman calendar, this is the evening of January 5th. At the beginning of January 6th. In the Egyptian calendar, it is the 11th of Tibi. In the Syrian or Greek, it is the 6th of Ordinaeus. In the Cypriot or Salamanian, it is the 5th day of the 5th month. In the Paphian, it is the 14th of July. In the Arabian, it is the 21st of Alon. In the Macedonian, it is the 16th of Apollonius. In the Cappadocian, it is the 13th of Arteries. In the Athenian, it is the 5th of Maomacterium. And in the Hebrew calendar, it is the 5th of Tebeth. That's it. So Epiphanius, that's in his Panarian Book 2. So that's what Epiphanius had written in the 4th century. That's what he said. That was when Jesus was born, the 6th of January. The Armenian Church still celebrates Christmas, or rather, they call it Asdvad's Heidnutium, which is translated as Theophany. They still celebrate that on January the 6th. They do not celebrate the birth of Jesus on the 25th of December at all. So that's the Armenian Church. Now, writing in the 2nd century or early 3rd century, Clement of Alexandria states that some had determined not only the year, but also the day of the birth of Jesus. And he states, and there are those who have determined not only the year of our Lord's birth, but also the day. And they say that it took place on the 28th of Augustus, and in the 25th day of Pachon. And the followers of Basilides hold the day of his baptism as a festival, spending the night before in readings. And they say that it was the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, the 15th day of the month Tubi. Now, obviously, all of these are not, the months that we would know, what we're calling them. And some that is, these are all different types of months that are called by all of these different people. And some that it was the 11th of the same month. And treating of his passion with very great accuracy, some say that it took place on the 16th year of Tiberius, on the 25th of Faminoth, and others the 25th of Pharmuthi, and others say that it on the 19th of Pharmuthi the Saviour suffered. Further, others say that he was born on the 24th or 25th of Pharmuthi. So out of all of that, the information that we need there, right at the bottom, is further. Others say that he was born on the 24th or 25th of Pharmuthi. And that's Clement of Alexandria and Stromata, Book 1, Chapter 21. Now, Clement of Alexandria gives 2 to 3 possible dates that were being asserted as the birth date of Jesus. The 20th of May to the 25th day of Pachon. So Pachon was the Egyptian month from April 26th to May 25th. Okay, yeah, there you go. Internet goes gone. Hopefully that will be the only time that it goes tonight. Do apologize. I'm trying to. I have no idea what's what's going on with the internet. It just where I am doing. I might have to do it in a different place because it just keeps crashing here. So I'm going to have to go back through. It's just one of those things, unfortunately. Right. Okay. So I don't know where that crashed. Hopefully you heard. So Clement of Alexandria gives 2 to 3 possible dates of when Jesus was born. So one of those dates is the 20th of May, and the another one is April the 20th or April the 21st. So these are the 2 dates that Clement of Alexandria was stating. So yeah. So obviously none of those dates, January the 6th, May 20th, or April 20th or 21st, none of those dates are December 25th. Now, Hippolytus of Rome, who lived in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, claimed Jesus was born on or around the 25th of December, depending on when the calends of January were dated. So Hippolytus states, for the first advent of our Lord in the flesh, when he was born in Bethlehem, was 8 days before the calends of January, the 4th day, while Augustus was in his 42nd year. And that's in his Hippolytus of Rome commentary on Daniel. So originally the calends of a month are the first of a month in the Roman calendar. So that would be the 1st of January. So the calends of a month being the 1st of January, or would be during, so that would be back to the 25th of, or around about 24th, the evening of 24th to the 25th of December. But the calends of January were actually set later, and at one point, and they were set at the 3rd of January. So it depends on the dating of these, and I haven't quite been able to figure out exactly where these cross over, and whether he is referring back from 8 days from the 3rd of January, and it's 8 days back from there, or it's 8 days back from the 1st of January. I'm quite confident from what I've looked at that he is 8 days from the 1st of January. But there is a possibility that wouldn't quite align and would be incorrect. I'm going to do further study on that. But certainly he is saying that Jesus was born on the 25th of December, or possibly 27th of December. But it is certainly around that kind of time that he is he's dating the birth of Jesus. And that was now Hippolytus, that's Hippolytus of Rome, and he is writing. So he lived 170 to 240 AD. So it's fairly early that date has come up. So it's 25th or 27th of December. But what is clear by the statement of Clement of Alexandria, Epiphanius, and Hippolytus is that at least in the late 2nd and 3rd centuries, and even later, but at this point, if we just take Hippolytus and Clement of Alexandria at the 2nd and 3rd centuries, that's less than 200 years after the birth of Jesus. It was not commonly known as to when Jesus was actually born. That people were trying to work out exactly when it was, and that no common consensus for the date of the birth of Jesus had been agreed on, as different dates were being postulated, not one specific date. Okay, about 1 to 2 minutes missed. Hopefully you did see the Hippolytus, the Clement of Alexandria, and that did appear. I will, just in case, and if anybody wants to go back, let me just there you go. That's the if you did miss that, I'm not sure where it cut off and come back in. So hopefully you will be able to read Clement of Alexandria making the statement of when he believed, or when people were saying that Jesus was born. The 20th, those dates work out to the 20th of May, or the 20th or 21st of April, and that's at the bottom there. Further, others say that he was born on the 24th or 25th of Farmuthi. Those Egyptian dates work out to be 20th of May or 20th or 21st of April. So hopefully you've got that. I apologize for the cutting out of the internet, and hopefully we won't have any more problems now. Okay, so obviously we've looked at the different dates that were being postulated anyway. So and kind of the earliest, Hippolytus is the earliest attestation back to 25th of December, or certainly around about that kind of time. That was his postulation. So now, an important witness to the birthday of Jesus being celebrated on the 25th of December is a manuscript named Chronograph of 354. So called because it is dated to 354. Let me... So okay, this is the calends of January. So I missed this slide actually. So this is the calends of January. If you go to Oxford Classical Dictionary, you'll be able to see that the calends of January was a festival that was involved both official and private celebrations and rituals. Its durability as a New Year festival into late antiquity and beyond is striking. January 1st was the beginning of the consular year. From the mid to 2nd century onwards, codified in the reform of the calendar under Julius Caesar, and marked by the public consultation of the auguries and the procession of new consuls to the capital for the customary vows and sacrifices. During the imperial period, vows of loyalty to the emperor were made by the Senate, the army, and provincials on this date. As part of the extension of the period of calend celebration, the making of a yearly vota publica, originally on January 1st, became fixed on January 3rd. So yeah, depending on when that is dated, it changes from the 1st of January to the 3rd of January. So it's definitely late December, but it's either the 25th or 27th. Okay, so let's get back to the chronograph. So this is the chronograph of 354, and so the chronograph of 354 obviously dated. It's called that because that's the date of it, 354 AD, and it was a cylindrical text produced for a wealthy Roman Christian named Valentinus by the calligrapher and illustrator Furius Dionysius Philocolus. So this is kind of fully illustrated manuscript. Now, it states, just as Hippolytus did, that Jesus was born 8 days before the calends of January. So it's almost certain that the calends of January were the 3rd of January at this point, but it's no guarantee that we're talking about either the 1st or the 3rd of January anyway. I'm not sure exactly which date we're talking about. But it literally states, this is in Latin, and then at the bottom we've got the English there. When these were consuls, Lord Jesus Christ was born 8 days before the calends of January. And now it's the translation has got there December 25th on the day of the Venus moon fall, Venus moon 15, but that's somebody's insertion of that. That's not what the manuscript itself says. It just says that Christ was born 8 days before the calends of January. Somebody has inserted that December the 25th. It likely is the 25th, but it could be 27th. So the chronograph of 354 is actually the earliest attestation to any celebration, while Hippolytus actually states that he was born 8 days before the calends of January back in the late 2nd, early 3rd century. This manuscript is actually the first attestation to a celebration on that date. And so it states 8th day before the calends of January, December 25th, birth of Christ in Bethlehem of Judea. So there was a commemoration date for the martyrs. And so they were celebrating on this. Now, whether it's actually a celebration to the birth of Jesus is likely, but it's not. Also, it's not because it's the commemoration dates of the martyrs. So there was a celebration on the 25th of December. Certainly that, and it looks like it's for the birth of Christ in Bethlehem of Judea. Now, this section of the manuscript is believed to be dated from around about 336 AD. So the earliest recorded commemoration of the birth of Jesus on the 25th of December dates to 336 AD. Now, it doesn't actually say that this is when the commemoration started. It is only our first record of it. It could have started earlier, but this is just the record that states that it was happening on that time at 336 AD. Whether it's actually, this is the first one that was being celebrated is up for argument. But so by certainly this date anyway, 336 AD, there was a commemoration being held probably to the birth of Jesus on the 25th of December. Do you see this topic as similar to finding the exact year of Jesus' birthday? Yeah, I think we're more likely to be able to kind of figure out the birth year of Jesus than we are the birth date, the actual date itself. I think that there are good arguments for certain dates, and maybe one day I'll go through those. The arguments for that. I think we're more likely to know the year than I think there's more evidence for the year than there is obviously the specific day that he was born. So yeah, this part is over 300 years after Jesus had been born and is not based on the biblical text itself. So any attempt to link Horus and Jesus by the way of their birth date based on the start of a commemoration of the birth of Jesus on the 25th of December, that likely did not start to take place until 3 centuries after his actual birth, is disingenuous and nothing more than a desperate attempt to try and discredit the historical Jesus. The only thing that could be asserted is that the tradition of the celebration of the birth of Jesus was a copy of the birth date of Horus, or at least was applied to the same birth date of Jesus, being a copy of the birth date of Horus. Only a possible connection between the much later added tradition and the birth date of Horus. That's not the same argument to argue about a tradition about the birth date of Jesus and the actual birth date of Jesus. Now, if you believe that Jesus is born on the 25th of December, no problem whatsoever with that. I find it, I would be doubtful of it, but I by no means would I say no, he wasn't, because I don't think we can prove it either way. But if you want to say that he was born on the 25th of December, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And if you want to celebrate that on the 25th of December, there's nothing wrong with that at all. You are not celebrating the birth date of Horus. If you are celebrating the birth date of Jesus, you know what you're doing. So I don't think that there's any problem with that at all for a Christian to celebrate the 25th of December. Now, whether the 25th of December has traditionally been used and it is a pagan festival is another thing. But those are two different arguments. That is not the same thing to say that I am celebrating the birthday of Jesus on that day. All right. But while the church, the early church anyway, were postulating dates as to when the birth of Jesus had taken place, it is important to note that none of the early church fathers make reference to any festival or celebration of the birth of Jesus at any time of year by early Christianity, the early Christians. Neither Irenaeus nor Tertullian make note of a Christmas celebration being held on any date in their list of festivals. And I'll just so this is the list of festivals that Irenaeus states, and that's you'll find that in Irenaeus fragment 7. I won't read it, but he lists different festivals, and he doesn't list Pentecost, Easter. He's not he doesn't list Christmas or the birth date of Jesus. Early Christians of at least the 1st and 2nd century and probably 3rd centuries simply did not celebrate the birth of Jesus on any day, or there's no record of it anyway. And they didn't celebrate it on any day, let alone the 25th of December. There is no record of it. Like I say, the earliest record we have is 336 AD. Now, more importantly still is that there is no command in the Bible to commemorate the date of the birth of Jesus. That doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that there's no command to do it. So, unlike these other gods, we're not told to commemorate this date, this birthday. The stories are, the arguments are just not the same. So the Bible does not give us a date that Jesus was born, and neither does it give us any command or instruction revolving around its celebration. The celebration is a later tradition of the church and cannot be used against the biblical attestation about Jesus. Even if Horus and every other pagan god was born on the 25th of December, the only thing that this would demonstrate is that the tradition that came later regarding the birth date of Jesus had been copied from the date of the pagan gods, or that they just used that date. It would in no way demonstrate that the historical Jesus was born on that date, or the historical Jesus was a copy of the pagan gods. And neither would it show the biblical narrative was a copy or dependent on those mythical gods and the mythical stories about those gods. So, was Horus born on the 25th of December? Now, when it comes to the claim regarding, so we've done Jesus. We don't know when Jesus was born, but let's say that Jesus was born on the 25th of December. It makes no difference. And there's nothing wrong with a Christian saying that Jesus was born on the 25th of December and celebrating that date. Now, if you are celebrating the birth of Jesus on that day, knowing that it's a pagan date and you're celebrating the pagan gods, then that's a completely different argument. That's a different thing. Christians don't do that. When it comes to the claim regarding Horus being born on the 25th of December, there is no historical evidence to say that Horus was born on that date or believed to have been born on that date. In her book, The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold, Akaria S. gives no source of her claim that Horus was born on the 25th of December. However, in her book, The Christ in Egypt, she does cite the source, or a source, for her claim. Plutarch. Plutarch remarked that Horus, the child, or Harpocrates, his Greek name, was born about the winter solstice, unfinished and infant-like. And you'll find that in Christ in Egypt on page 83. She also states this in an online article and also cites a second source, Macrobius, okay, as support for the assertion. At the winter solstice, the sun would seem to be a little child, like that which the Egyptians bring forth from a shrine on an appointed day. Since the day is then at its shortest, and the god is accordingly shown as a tiny infant. Right, that's what it states. And that is from Macrobius Saturnalia. And we'll worry about Saturnalia in a bit. Maybe I probably won't even get to Saturnalia in this particular study. It's actually irrelevant. But if I've got time, I'll try and get to it. So this is Macrobius is writing on Saturnalia, and she says in an online. So this is her website. I don't know if it's her website or it is a website where she posts to. So it's stellarhousepublishing.com. I'm not sure if it is actually her website, but there's a lot of writings from her on this particular website. And this is what she states. Confirming the contentions in the Chronicon, ancient Latin writer Macrobius in Saturnalia also reported on the annual Egyptian Christmas celebration, specifying the time as the winter solstice or December 25th. I've specifically put that in red there, December 25th. I don't know if you've caught that yet, but if you haven't, I'll explain it. If you have, well done. So Plutarch, at about the time the winter solstice, so this is from his book. About the time of the winter solstice, Isis gave birth to Harpocrates, imperfect and premature. So she quotes Plutarch correctly. And what she says about his writing, so this is on Isis and Osiris, the Plutarch's writing. It's only that one is only it's a very so Plutarch's book, the Plutarch on Osiris is very small. There's you can read that in one day. It's a small book, but so this is where a lot of all of this information has come from Plutarch. And she says, in this regard, we learn from one of the most famous historians of the first century, Plutarch, that Horus the child, Harpocrates, was born about the winter solstice, unfinished and infant-like. So that's what she wrote on the website. And obviously we've already seen what she writes in the book. In reality, neither source that Acaria S cites states that Horus was born on the 25th of December. Right? That's what she stated, was that he was born around the winter solstice or 25th of December. That's what she said, 25th of December. That's not what Macrobius stated. He said around the winter solstice. Wasn't what Plutarch said. Plutarch said at about the time of the winter solstice. She's added in there the 25th of December. All right. So she states This again is her in her book, Christ in Egypt, page 84. She states that the fact of Plutarch stating that Horus was born on the 25th of December, or December 25th, is vitally important to keep in mind, because there has been much denial and censorship of it. Well, Plutarch did not say that he was born on December the 25th. You're saying that. That's what you said, right? Specifying the time as the winter solstice or the December the 25th is not the same thing. That's dishonest. They do not mean the same thing. All right? The winter solstice does not occur on the 25th of December. The winter solstice in the northern hemisphere occurs either on the 21st or 22nd of December, not the 25th. To say specifying the time as the winter solstice or the 25th of December, linking them as one, is either misunderstanding of what Plutarch stated, or it's a deliberate twisting of the statement in an attempt to make it say something that it doesn't. Now, obviously, these two dates are at similar time of the year, but to claim that Horus was born on the 25th of December based on these two sources, which are her sources, is simply taking the written evidence and applying a date into the evidence that is clearly not stipulated in order to assert a claim. Any honest examination of those two sources should demonstrate that Acaria S has taken the statements of at the time of and about the time of the winter solstice and simply falsely equated these statements as referring to the 25th of December. Furthermore, and I really forgot, this was a slide that I was meant to do. I was meant to try and explain it. So you're going to have to visualize this one. I know I haven't got the slide for this, but this is actually really important, but you need to visualize this. The Egyptian year, right? The Egyptians used a totally different calendar than what we do. All right. The Egyptian calendar was made up of 360 days. Ours is 365. They had 12 months of 30 days. And they had 5 epagomenal days at the end of the year. Now that means that those days were added in for purpose of timekeeping. Okay, so their year was 360 days, but they had an extra 5 days at the end of those, which were not part of their year. They were extra days, obviously for timekeeping. That's what they were for. They didn't classify them as their part of their year. 12 months of 30 days, 360 days in total was their year, and then these extra 5 days. All right. And there's a lot of things that went on in these 5 extra days. And in fact, actually, they actually thought they lived in fear for these 5 days, because they thought that the world would end. And so they were really glad when the New Year started. And that's probably why the New Year celebrations. But they actually lived in fear for these 5 days. And there's lots of other things that have been added into these 5 days, which we'll get to in a second. So, but just like today, that we have a leap year every 4 years, where one day is added to the 4th year. All right, so we have that kind of added day. They had those, but they were 5 days, obviously up to 365. The Egyptians did not have the extra day that what we do every 4 years. All right, so their calendar was 365, 365, 365, 365, 365. They didn't have this extra year, which meant that their calendar slipped every 4 years in relation to our calendar. If you put the two calendars together, all right, their calendar would slip against ours every 4 years by 1 day. So even if it could be demonstrated that in one year in the Egyptian calendar, the winter solstice fell on the 20th, or the equivalent of the 25th of December of our calendar. All right. In 4 years' time, it would fall on the 24th of December because it slipped a day. All right. And then in another 4 years' time, it would fall on the 23rd of December. 4 years later, it would fall on the 22nd of December, and so on, and so on, and so on. It would actually take 1,460 years before the two calendars would then realign back on the 25th of December. 4 times 365 years, 1,460 years. So their calendar is slipping every year. All right. And Plutarch, who Acaria uses, he's her source, so we're going to use Plutarch as well, because it's really important that we use her, we get the full information of what Plutarch. We're not just going to cherry pick from what we want to use. We're going to use Plutarch, and Plutarch attests to this, and they say that the sun, when he I've got lie there, but that's meant to be he, became aware of Rhea's intercourse with Cronus, invoked a curse upon her, and she should not give birth to a child in any month or any year. But Hermes, being enamored of the goddess, consorted with her. Later, playing at draughts with the moon, he won from her the 70th part of each of her periods of illumination. And from all the winnings, he composed 5 days and intercalated them as an addition to the 360 days. The Egyptians, even now, call these 5 days intercalated and celebrate them as the birthdays of the gods. All right. So Plutarch, that's Plutarch on Isis and Osiris, chapter 12. So these 5 days become the birthdays of the gods. Now, during his reign, in between 246 and 222 BC, Ptolemy III, in his Canopus decree, did attempt to add a 6th intercalated day, epagomenal day, to the calendar every 4 years, like what we have, that leap year. So we have that extra day every 4 years. However, due to resistance by the Egyptian priests, this reform of the calendar did not actually take place until the calendar was changed to the Alexandrian, or the Coptic calendar, introduced by the Roman Emperor Augustus in around 30 BC. And so this is Ancient Egyptian Online.co.uk about their calendar. I won't bother reading that. But yeah, this is about the day that they wanted. Ptolemy III tried to introduce an extra day every 4 years to correct this, but the Egyptians were resistant. So their system missed a quarter of a day each year, right? So obviously after 4 years, you get a full day. So this meant that around that time, in relation to the Gregorian calendar, every 4 years, the two calendars would differ by 1 full day, and thus it is simply impossible to assert that Horus was born on the 25th of December in relation to today's Gregorian calendar. So even more important, though, is that the fact that both of those sources cited by Acaria S, Plutarch and Macrobius, they are AD. They come from AD, meaning I'm using AD. You can use CE. I prefer AD because that's my preference, but Anno Domini or the Common Era. These are after Jesus has been born, died, and resurrected. All right, that's when these are writing. They're the sources that she's citing come after Jesus. So now Plutarch wrote in the first and late 1st century and early 2nd centuries, and Marcobius in the 5th century AD. Neither source comes from before the birth of Christianity, a birth of Christ and Christianity, and so neither are direct Egyptian sources. They are secondary sources. In fact, there are no Egyptian sources whatsoever that state that Horus was born on the 25th of December, or even around the winter solstice. This is not found in the pyramid texts, nor is it found in any coffin texts, and nor is it found in the book of the book of the dead. No Egyptian text makes any reference to Horus having been born around the winter solstice. This is much later. Now, what is of interest when it comes to Plutarch as a source of evidence is that it is almost certain that Plutarch himself did not read or speak any form of the Egyptian language, but rather he relied on writings of other people, classical writers, interpreters, and conversations that he was having AD in the 1st century. All right. And so a historian, Egyptologist, Geraldine Pinch, in the Handbook of Egyptian Mythology states, Plutarch was fascinated by the Egyptian religion and wrote a book on his topic called Concerning Isis and Osiris. He could not read or speak any form of the Egyptian language. So he had to rely on conversations through interpreters and speculations about Egyptian deities found in the works of earlier classical writers. Plutarch's narrative of the life and death of Osiris and the wanderings of his widow is one commonly used in popular books on Egyptian mythology. So he is the source that people use. But Plutarch, he's AD, he didn't even speak Egyptian, or he couldn't read Egyptian either. And that's the Handbook of Egyptian Mythology from that book. Much of Plutarch's Osiris narrative must have been based on stories and customs that were current in Egypt during the 1st century CE, after Jesus had been during the 1st century CE, but this does not make it a reliable source for earlier periods. The myth of Osiris had been developing for 2,500 years before Plutarch was born, but Plutarch's sources could only take him back about 600 years. And that's also Geraldine Pinch. Plutarch, when he went, so this is R.E. Witt in a book called Isis in the Ancient World, states Plutarch, when he went about writing his essay on Isis and Osiris, had the task of weaving a systematic theology out of the odds and ends of Egyptian mythology. Now, Mr. Witt and his book, Isis in the Ancient World, will become even more relevant later on in the study. Acaria S. is relying on the witness of post-Christ writers who almost certainly could only relay the stories as they were told at the time that they were writing, which is post-Christ. And the witness is not supported by the Egyptian texts themselves. So it is unreliable at best. So this is where it starts to get a little bit, I would say, dishonest. Additionally, well, it's already been dishonest, but additionally, in the online article that we've already stated, that I've already cited, in the writing by Acaria S., it also states that Horus Oh, so that's the Isis in the Ancient World, his book. So it states, as concerns Horus in particular, serving as the light god, it should be noted that he was synchronized often with the sun god Ra, as Ra Horakhti, or Horus of the two horizons, representing the rising and setting sun. This Horus the child was also known to the Greeks as Harpocrates. In this form, Horus thus is born daily, including and especially at the winter solstice. So this is pure deception now. If Horus was in fact considered to be born daily, it would no longer matter what day the actual historical Jesus was born. It would be able to be asserted that Jesus and Horus share a birth date in common. But saying that Horus was born every day, and so makes Horus and Jesus equivalent, because they were both said to have been born on the 25th December, is nothing more than dishonest. Christianity does not say that, and never has stated that Jesus was born every day. Sharing a birth date when one of the references is born every day is in no way the same as both sharing a single birth date and thus making the claim invalid. Right, and that's how Acaria S is able to say that Jesus and Horus have the same birth date. Now, hopefully you noticed that she states as well, in this form, Horus thus is born daily, including and especially at the winter solstice. In this form indicates that there are other forms when it comes to Isis, Osiris, and Horus. There are, in fact, multiple stories and myths that have been told, and these stories have changed throughout the history of the Egyptian dynasties, as attested to by the actual Egyptian texts themselves. They change. No story is exactly alike, and there are, in reality, a number of different Horuses, and each Horus differs from the other. So we must ask, which Horus and in which story do we obtain all of these facts about Horus from? Because there are different stories. When we look at the evidence from the Egyptians and the later adaptations, there is not one specific story that can be appealed to in order to claim what Acaria S claims. The story has simply changed throughout time. Conflating the stories as if they are one story is deceptive. Parts of the story are shown in different Egyptian texts. So we have the pyramid texts, we have the coffin texts, we have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, then we have the stories of Plutarch. So Plutarch's stories are different than the Egyptian stories. There are similarities, but there are things which, and then there are adaptations from today that are then asserted because they've kind of mingled them together, or they've added to the story, which the story doesn't state itself. And this is common. This is something that happens throughout all of these other pagan, these gods. You'll find that the stories have just changed over time, added to it. There isn't a single story for these gods. But it's also interesting that, and I'm not going to read this writing because it is quite long. But Plutarch in chapter 11 states that whenever you hear the traditional tales of that the Egyptians tell about their gods, their wanderings, dismemberments, many experiences of this sort, you must remember what has been already said and you must not think that any of these tales actually happened in the manner in which they are related. The facts are that they do not call the dog by the name Hermes as his proper name, right? So basically, what he goes and argues is that nobody's actually that nobody thinks that these stories are like real stories. They're all allegorical. They're not. The Egyptians aren't thinking these are real, or the people aren't thinking these are real stories about the gods. These are added stories. But let's take a closer look at the writings of Plutarch again, because I'm going to continue using Plutarch because that's the source that Icaria has used as part of her evidence, and that what she appeals to. So it's important that we figure out what he is actually stating. So let's have a look, and let's take a little bit of more of an expansion of the context of the quote that Icaria S actually cited. So, in this way, we shall undertake to deal with the numerous and tiresome people, whether they be such as take pleasure in associating theological problems with the seasonal changes in the surrounding atmosphere, or with the growth of the crops and seed times and ploughing, and also those who say that Osiris is being buried at the time when the grain is sown and covered in the earth, and that he comes to life and reappears when plants begin to sprout. For this reason, also, it is said that Isis, when she perceived that she was pregnant, put upon herself an amulet on the 6th day of the month of Fathoth, and about the time of the winter solstice, she gave birth to Harpocrates, imperfect and premature, amid the early flowers and shoots. For this reason, they bring to him as an offering the first fruits of growing lentils, and the days of his birth they celebrate after the spring equinox. When the people hear these things, they are satisfied with them and believe them, deducing the plausible explanation directly from what is obvious and familiar. So, what he's talking about regarding some of the people that do believe these as factual, he states they are numerous and tiresome people. All right, this is Plutarch stating this. He also states that the days of his birth, so Harpocrates, Horus, they were celebrated after the spring equinox. All right, he doesn't state that the celebration was happening on the winter solstice. The celebration was happening at the days of the spring equinox. Now, it could mean that they celebrated the days of Horus, the birth of Horus, twice yearly, at his birth around the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Or it could simply mean that this was the only time when they celebrated the days of his birth. Plutarch does not state that the celebrations of the birth of Horus took place at the winter solstice. So if we were to say that, you would have to read that into the statement, obviously, that he was born around the winter solstice. But the celebration, it seems like that happened around the spring equinox, which is obviously very different than what the Christians do. We're celebrating the birthday of Jesus around what we believe or people say or understand the celebration of the birthday of Jesus. So, furthermore, Plutarch, right, now actually, what he actually states here is that he refers to Isis having given birth to Harpocrates, not Horus, around the winter solstice. And this is another important piece of information. Harpocrates is the the Greek god that was adapted from the Egyptian god Horus. They're not the same god, but they are one is adapted from the other, right? In the worldhistory.org, it states the son of Osiris and Isis is known as Horus the child, Harpocred, who was transformed into the Greek god Harpocrates after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 331 BCE. So while it is true that the Egyptian god Horus is the basis on which the Greek god Harpocrates is derived, who Plutarch is referring to, Harpocred literally translates as Horus the child. When we study the two gods, we will find that they actually differ in many ways. Harpocrates was the god of silence. The Greek god Harpocrates is a much later version of the Egyptian god Horus and differs from that Egyptian Horus. And worldhistory.org states Harpocrates also means Horus the child, but the deity differed from the Egyptian Horus. Harpocrates was the Greek god of silence and confidentiality, the keeper of secrets, whose statuary regularly depicts him as a winged child with his finger to his lips. So Horus, the Egyptian god, was not Horus the child. All right. The Greek god is known as Horus the child. Horus, the Egyptian god, was actually known as Horus the elder, who is equated also with Apollo. Plutarch states that Apollo, right? It was Apollo that was born from Isis and Osiris while they were still in their mother's womb. The birth of Apollo from Isis and Osiris, while these gods were still in their womb of Re, has the allegorical meaning that before this world was made visible and its rough material was completed, formed by reason, it was to put to test by nature and brought forth of itself the first creation imperfect. This is the reason why they say that this god was born in the darkness, a cripple, and they call him the elder Horus, for there was then no world, but only an invisible and outline of a world to be. According to Plutarch, Horus the elder does not share the same birth date with Horus the child, which is Harpocrates, which we've already seen. He states Harpocrates was born around the winter solstice, but he now states that this god, this Horus, the elder, was born at a different time, and it just gets very confusing with all of these different gods, the conflation, the stories about them, that people are misunderstanding, misinterpreting what is actually being stated. But again, this is quite a long writing, quite a long quote. I apologize for having to read all of that. But they say that the sun, when he became aware of Re's intercourse with Cronus, invoked a curse upon her that she should not give birth to a child in any month or any year, which we've already kind of read already. But Hermes, being enamored of the goddess, consorted with her. Later, playing at draughts with the moon, he won from her the 70th part of each of her periods of illumination, right? Okay, and then he refers to the days of the intercalated days. So we've already read these 5 intercalated days. But when we go a little bit further on, right, to that, we will actually see that it states Osiris had been born. And for this, Cronus entrusted to him the child Osiris, which he brought up. It is in his honor of the festival of Pamilia is celebrated, a festival which resembles the phallic processions. On the second of these days, now we're talking about the added intercalated days, our Eurus was born, whom they call Apollo, and some call him also the elder Horus. So Plutarch is stating that this elder Horus was born on the second of the intercalated days, which means the second of the epagomenal days that, as we have already seen, are the end of the Egyptian days of the 360 days. This then would equate at best to being the 28th of December. If we directly equated the Gregorian calendar that we have now against the Egyptian calendar, excluding obviously that differing of the slippaging of that day, which would occur every 4 years. So now we have this Horus, the Horus the Elder, born on a different date than the Horus Harpocrates Horus. The two different is just very confusing. But what's happening is people are conflating these stories, and they're creating as if they are one story. But this Horus, so whereas the Apollo, birthed from Isis and Osiris, was considered a cripple, as we already read, this Horus, Horus the Elder, is referred to by Plutarch. So although this elder Horus and Apollo are kind of linked together as being the same god, the Apollo version of that is a cripple, and the Horus the Elder is referred to by Plutarch as being sorry, this is on the second of those days. There we go. I missed a slide. But this Horus is himself perfected and complete. So now we've got Horus Harpocrates, which is the god that is born on at the winter solstice. We now have Horus the Elder, who is different from Horus the Harpocrates, who is born on the 28th of, or roughly around the 28th of December, who is linked to Apollo, but Apollo is a cripple, and Horus is perfect and complete. It is just it's very, these stories, I mean, this is Plutarch. This is the stories that Plutarch is stating. They're all in the same book. And these are the source. This is a source for all the information that are facts. These are facts, remember. This is what the Acaria S, this is what Zeitgeist are presenting as facts. These aren't possibilities, or they're not presenting arguments. These are facts. This is what we must take. So Acaria S is conflating the two stories, probably others as well, that Horus, the Egyptian god, and the later Greek god Harpocrates, and reinserts the story of Harpocrates back into the story of Horus, making them one and the same story, which they just are not. And we will see that this conflation between the two becomes even more apparent as we address the other claims about Horus in the film and the book that underlies the film. Conflating myths, stories, is actually fundamental to how Acaria derives her claims regarding Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Now, this is very, very similar to another book that Alexander Hislop wrote, which is called The Two Babylons, which I have also written extensively against. And you'll probably know about Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. All right. Hopefully I've got the book here. It should be. Yeah. the two Babylons, right? This book, right? I'm going to do a study. I'm going to show you the study on this: Tammuz, Semiramis, and Nimrod. I'm sure everybody's heard about those three gods, and the copy of Christianity that supposedly happened from these gods. All of this, the Alexander Hislop, the conflation, the assertions that he makes, it's I don't even know how anybody could actually write that book. It's the brainwork of somebody very, very intelligent, but the manipulation and the misrepresentation of facts in order to create that story that he does is immense. And I need to do that study properly on those three gods. But that's very, very similar to what is going on with the conflation going on in there. Hello, Nick. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know how much you've watched. Hopefully, you've been in at least you would be kept up to some points that I've made. But thank you very much for joining. So yeah, this assimilation of one god into another is really how these gods are created, and these stories are created, and how these assertions are made that Jesus is a copy of these other gods. And as we've already seen, basically what it's doing is taking one source that is a secondary source, conflating it with another source that is a secondary source, creating its own stories, and then just making this kind of Frankenstein's monster of a story, and then going, see, this is fact, and then presenting it as if Jesus is a copy of this Frankenstein's monster that is not a reality story. The gods of ancient civilizations often merged with gods of later civilizations, such as, you've got the Babylonians, you've got the Sumerians, then you've got the Egyptians, Greeks and Romans. They all copied and used each other's gods, and they adapted them, and different civilizations would have a god that was derived from an earlier god of a different civilization. However, the stories that were told and applied to these gods would then differ, often in fundamental ways. While there would be similarities, there would often be embellishments and complete opposing myths that would be attributed to these assimilated gods. And it is also true that the stories told about gods from one civilization would be embellished through that civilization's own time period, such as the Egyptians through the dynasties that they had, or dynasties that they had. The stories literally changed. The coffin texts differ from the pyramid texts, which differ from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The stories are different. And Plutarch tells us that the goddess Isis had not always been deemed as such. In times past, she, along with Osiris, were deemed as demigods. And it was only later that she herself and Osiris translated their virtues from demigods into gods. So let's again look at Plutarch, because Plutarch is the source of Arcaria S and Zeitgeist. So therefore is the judgment of those who hold to the stories about Typhon, Osiris, and Isis are records of experiences of neither gods nor men, but of demigods, whom Plato and Pythagoras and Xenocrates and Chrysippus, following the lead of early writers on sacred subjects, alleged to have been stronger than men, and in their might greatly surpassing our nature, yet not possessing the divine quality unmixed and uncontaminated, but with a share also in the nature of the soul and in the perceptive faculties of the body, and with a susceptibility to pleasure and pain and to whatsoever other experience is incident to these mutations, and is a source of much disquiet in some and of less in others. For in demigods, as in men, there are diverse degrees of virtues and vice. These exploits of the giants of Titans celebrated among the Greeks, the lawless deeds of Cronus. All right. I'm not gonna read all of this again, but if I can, she herself. So it's towards the middle. It says she herself and Osiris translated for their virtues from good demigods into gods, as were Heracles and Dionysus later, not incongruously enjoying double honors, both these gods and those of demigods, and their powers extend everywhere. All right. So, and this is also stated in chapter 30 as well. It says, now Osiris and Isis change from good minor deities into gods. All right, and that's obviously the quicker of those citations. But this is all Plutarch as well, as we've already seen. He's the source of these claims against Christianity. So, in reality, there is simply no evidence that Horus was said to have been born on the 25th of December. The only way to get even close to having Horus being born on the 25th of December is to manipulate the dates given by secondary sources, and to merge different versions of the myths about the birth of Horus together and present them as one singular story and say, bah, there you go. That's the story of Osiris. But that isn't come from the Egyptian sources. That's come from first century post-Christian post-Christ writers. That's not from the those dates. They're not attested to by the Egyptian texts themselves. There's not a text that says that Horus was born on the winter solstice. That's Plutarch, right? Who didn't even speak Egyptian and relied on stories that were being told in the first century, right? There's no reason to say, right, okay, well, Christianity copied these stories. No, these stories come after Christ. They've been copied, or the likelihood is that they've been copied from Christianity rather than the other way around, because they actually date to later than Christianity. But so that's basically the date of the 25th December. But was Isis a virgin? All right. When it comes to Horus having been born of a virgin, we will see even more conflation and manipulating of the evidence in order to present Horus having been born by the virgin Isis. In an article on the website that we've already seen, mentioned prior, we find the following assertion made by Akaria S. regarding Isis and her supposed virgin birth of Horus. One of the meanings behind the virgin-born solar deity myth is the pristine dawn birthing the new sun, while it was also said that the moon reflecting the sun's rays likewise gave birth to the solar entity. Another connotation is the constellation of Virgo, in Ptolemaic times identified with Isis. According to pseudo Eratosthenes, the celestial virgin was supposed to be Isis, the symbol of the returning year. In a text called the Katastrosmio, or Katasterismi, pseudo-Eratosthenes includes an essay on the constellation of Virgo called Parthenos, a Greek word usually rendered virgin. According to this text, which dates to the 2nd centuries AD CE, but purports to be an epitome of the lost writings of the Greek astronomer Eratosthenes, 276 to 194 BCE. Isis appears among other deities represented by this virginal figure. Hesiod in the Theogony says this figure is Dike, the daughter of Zeus, Dios, and Themis. Some say it is Demeter because of the sheaf of grain she holds. Another say it is Isis. Others Atargetes, others Tyche, and for that reason they represent her as headless. The Greek word Parthenos, used to describe these various goddesses, including Isis, is the mythical term by which Jesus' mother, Mary, is called decades to centuries later. Also, like Isis, Mary too is called Virgo in Jerome's Latin Vulgate. In antiquity, therefore, both in Egyptian hieroglyphs and in Greek texts, Isis is styled the Great Virgin. Now, that's all what she has written. That's her writing. Okay, that is Acaria S. That's the writer of these books. One of the sources for Zeitgeist. That's Acaria S's writings. Now, there's some important things that Acaria S even states herself, but the Greek word Parthenos, used to describe Isis as a virgin, is identical term by which Jesus' mother is called decades to centuries later. Now, once again, we must understand that a similarity or a commonality does not indicate that one is dependent on the other. If Isis was indeed depicted as a virgin prior to the Virgin Mary, this would not automatically mean that the virginity of Mary, as stated in the Bible, would necessarily or indeed at all be a copy of the Virgin of Isis. It is perfectly reasonable, plausible, and acceptable that regardless of the virginity of any previous goddess in any other religion, that the virginity of Mary would be able to stand up on its own merits. Dependency would need to be demonstrated, and that's not what's happening. But was Isis an actual virgin? In the claims regarding Isis, all right, Acaria S appeals to the pseudo Eratosthenes, and where she's written that pseudo, that's her own writings, pseudo Eratosthenes, which she states herself dates to the 1st or 2nd century AD. Although she further appeals to its own claims, the writing's own claims, that it is a lost writing of the Greek astronomer Eratosthenes, who lived between 276 194 BCE. The claim regarding Isis being linked to the constellation Virgo is also made by others. So we're going to deal with this Virgo connection. All right, it's made by that's not. There you go. Virgo is the constellation located between Leo and Libra, and since ancient times it was associated with the goddess or virtue and harvest. Perhaps it covers the part of the sky where the sun rises when the times was there to gather in the crops in autumn. In old Egypt, the constellation was seen as Isis, or Eset, as her Egyptian name was, perhaps the most popular and powerful Egyptian goddess. Right, so they're saying that Isis was linked to Virgo, obviously Virgo the Virgin. No source is, so this comes on this website that you can see there, corax.com, but no source is cited for the claim on the website, which seems to be common practice amongst those that assert this connection between Isis and the constellation Virgo. But it is likely that they've simply taken this claim from another source that has not cited a source from which they derived this information from. Thus, it is simply sourceless claims being repeated by those that don't source the claim. And it may well be, although as no source is given, it is simply it's an educated guess that they are using the same source that Acaria S used, that being the pseudo-Eratosthenes writing. The evidence does. The problem is that the writing or the evidence does not support that writing being penned by Eratosthenes. I'm probably butchering his name, but Eratosthenes, which is why it is referred to as pseudo. And she even refers to it as pseudo. The writing in reality, people, scholars date this to the 1st or 2nd century writing. And thus, it dates to after the New Testament has already been written. Therefore, the claim that Isis was associated with the constellation Virgo before the birth of Jesus by the Virgin Mary is simply incorrect. Mary was not she was not being associated with Virgo before she was the 1st century, right? Or the 1st, 2nd century, possibly, when that writing is written. Then she's being connected with Virgo because she's called Virgo in the Latin Vulgate, but we're getting Virgo being attached to the constellation, which is just not fact. She was never referred to as this constellation. And in fact, what we'll see now is that this association is then irrelevant to the argument that the Virgin Mary is a copy of Isis, based on Isis being associated with Virgo, the Virgin, because she wasn't. In fact, the argument could rather be made the opposite way round, that Isis is being labeled Virgo, Virgin, that being a copy of the Virgin Mary. And the Isis story is simply adapted and has taken on this attribute after Mary has been called the Virgin. So to say that centuries or decades before the Virgin Mary was called Parthenos, she's being referred to as Parthenos and Virgo by being connected to the constellation Virgo, is just madness and is just not fact. There is no writing on that. As Doki points out, get the duct tape to hold this myth together. Exactly. That's exactly what is happening. Is they are these myths are just right. We'll take a bit from there. We'll add this in. We'll put this together. We'll add it here. Right. Okay. We'll pretend that this writing was written before it was actually written. It's actually written after the birth of Jesus, but we'll pretend that it was written before Jesus so that we can then associate it before Jesus. It's just a web of deception. And this is how she has managed to create this myth, by doing this kind of information. So, was Isis associated with Virgo anyway before? Well, that's not what history states. According to Plutarch, remember, Plutarch is her source. He says that she is called the Greeks the dog star, but by the Egyptians Sothis, right? The dog star, or Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, right? And it states, Ordexus says that while many tombs of Osiris are spoken of in Egypt, his body lies in Busiris. For this, all of these ancient names, I know that I butcher all of them. I wish it'd be a lot easier in English, but you've got to try and read them, and I'm trying to read them quick as well. So I just stumble over them, and I do apologize for absolutely butchering some of these names. For this was the place of his birth. Moreover, Taphosiris requires no comment, for the name itself means the tomb of Osiris. I pass over the cutting of wood, the rendering of linen, and the libations that are offered, for the reason that many of their secret rites are involved therein, in regard not only to these gods, but in regard to the other gods, save only those whose existence had no beginning and shall have no end. The priests say that their bodies, after they have done with their labors, have been placed in the keeping of the priests and are cherished there, but that their souls shine as the stars in the firmament. This is where you get these, when somebody dies, another star in the sky and stuff. I actually believed that when I was very, very young. I got told that. But these are the gods that go up and they die. You probably, if you've ever watched The Lion King, that's what Simba says about the stars in the sky. But they're the kings, I suppose. But yeah, that's basically what's going on. And the soul of Isis is called by the Greeks the dog star, but by the Egyptian Sothis. Now the dog star is actually Sirius from Canis Major, so that's her star. Right, she's being associated with that star. Again, Plutarch states, as if they had been in their nature but mortal men. Moreover, they give to Osiris the title of general and the title of pilot to Canopus, from whom they say that the star derives its name. Also, the vessel which the Greeks call Argo, in form like the ships of Osiris, has been set among the constellations in his honor. Its course lies not far from that of Orion and the dog star. Of these, the Egyptians believe that one is sacred to Horus and the other to Isis, the dog star. Of the stars, the Egyptians think that the dog star is the star of Isis because it is brighter of water. They also hold the lion in honor, and they adorn the doorways of their shrines and gaping lions' heads because the Nile overflows. Notice that Plutarch also mentions numerous times that the Egyptians associated Isis with the dog star. So the Egyptians and the Greeks associated Isis with Sirius, the dog star, or Sothis in the Egyptian. They used to call it the Sothis. So Egyptologist R.E. Witt stated that there was a festival to Isis in Egypt ordained by Ptolemy III, and her star, Sothis, right, the dog star, arose, being regarded as the New Year's Day. Okay. So I did read that. We will see. We've already looked at R.E. Witt and his book, but he's going to come in important again in a minute. In a bit more. Some of the things that he states. So because she's actually appeals to R.E. Witt herself. So what is clear is that in neither ancient Egyptian nor Greece is Isis ever connected to the constellation Virgo. Right? She has a star. It's the brightest star in the sky. It's Sirius, Sothis, the dog star in Greek. That's what they call it. But that's her star, not the constellation Virgo. She's never called that in historical writings. Only is she being associated with Virgo in this post-Christ writing, which is then linking Mary to it as well. So there is no evidence that supports the claim that comes from the writings of the Egyptians or Greeks themselves. The evidence for the claim would seem to come back to the pseudo-Eratosthenes, and thus is not actually evidence at all. When it comes to the conception of Horus, Plutarch in his work Dionysus et Osiris, or on Osiris and Horus, he outlines numerous myths that were told. And he states that when it comes to the conception of Horus, as we've already seen in as we investigate the dates of Horus, the birth of Horus, one version of the story that Plutarch depicts has Apollo, who is associated with Horus, being born of Osiris and Isis while they are still in the womb of Re. So I'll just put that up again, right? But look at that, it's from Isis and Osiris, all right? And we're talking about the virgin birth here, but Plutarch is stating that the birth of Apollo from Isis and Osiris. And this was done while they were still in the womb of their mother. Now, let me see what the next. But Isis and Osiris were enamored of each other and consorted together in the darkness of the womb before their birth. Some say, so this is chapter 12, the other one was chapter 54, he states it twice. The darkness of the womb before their birth. Some say that Horus came from this union and was called the elder Horus by the Egyptians, but Apollo by the Greeks. So we can see that Isis and Osiris were depicted as being both brother and sister, while also being married, and they had this child, or they conceived the child at least while they were still in the womb of their mother. So this is one story that Plutarch is stating of how Horus was born. But he also states that it's completely allegorical. In chapter 54, he states it has the allegorical meaning that before this world was made visible and its rough material was completely formed by reason, it was put to the test by nature and brought forth of itself the creation imperfect. This is the reason why they say that this god was born in the darkness a cripple, and they call him the elder Horus, for there was then no world, but only an image, an outline of the world to be. So here it looks like he's saying that the elder Horus was actually the cripple, but actually he clarifies that, as we've already seen. He states that Apollo, who's connected to Horus the elder, Apollo is considered to be the cripple, but the Horus the elder is perfect. It's just a complete and utter mishmash. So another of the stories revolving around the birth of Horus, so there are many stories, involves Osiris being dismembered, cut up into 14 parts, those parts being scattered before Isis finds the body parts of his body, except his penis. She then fashions or creates a phallus, which she then consecrates the phallus. Now, this is different than modern versions, because a lot of modern versions will have Osiris being cut up into 14 pieces, spread about, Osiris finding the parts, missing the penis, creating the phallus, and then having sex with this phallus that she's created, and then becoming impregnated. That's not what Plutarch states. He just states that she consecrates the phallus. So if I can show that there, it says right towards the bottom, it says, but Isis made a replica of the member to take its place and consecrated the phallus, in honor of which the Egyptians, even at the present day, celebrate a festival. Right? What you'll see is that even this part of that story is taken from another story that is told about Osiris and Horus, how they Osiris and Isis and Osiris, how they had the child, and that part then gets integrated at the end of this part, because that's not what Plutarch actually states. So it's just a myth. It's so of the parts of Osiris's body, the only one which Isis did not find was the male member. For the reason that had been at once tossed into the river, and the lepaudos, the sea bream, and the pike had fed upon it. And it was from these very fishes the Egyptians are most scrupulous in abstaining. But Isis made a replica of the member to take its place and consecrated the phallus in honor of the Egyptians, even at the present day celebrate the festival. So, okay, now in another story told by Plutarch, so Plutarch is telling, this is Plutarch, Acaria's source, he's telling multiple stories, and we haven't even looked at what the Egyptian texts state. This is Plutarch, he couldn't read these Egyptian texts, and some, it's very unlikely that he had access to them at that time, and he's just making these up from stories that he's heard in the 1st century. In another story, he states that as they regard the Nile as the effusion of Osiris, have I missed a part there? Oh, okay. Why have I missed? I have. Sorry, I have missed a part. Yeah. Okay. I've skipped over. Maybe I've just. I think it's that one. Yeah, sorry. I skipped over a slide. As they regard the Nile as the effusion of Osiris, which is, him, so they hold and believe the earth to be the body of Isis. Not all of it, but so much as of it as the Nile covers, fertilizing it and uniting with it. From this union, they make Horus to be born, the all-conserving and fostering Hora. That is, the seasonable tampering of the surrounding air is Horus, who they say was brought up by Leto in the marshes around about Buta, for the watery and saturated land best nurtures these exaltations which quench and abate aridity and dryness. And been talking for 2 hours. My tongue's getting tied up now. Okay, so right, and it's just all confusing. The story, while clearly allegorical, would have some kind of union between Osiris and Isis in the conception of Horus. It is some kind of twisted story of evolution. Yeah, that's probably exactly what this is. So D.M. Murdoch, Acaria S, in Christ in Egypt, page 148, states, the impression is given from the text that it is a description of the Nile Osiris, overflowing its banks, spreading its seed on the land, Isis, in order to create Horus. We are also not discussing sexual intercourse. Well, of course we're not. This is allegorical. We're not even talking about, in this story, we're not even talking about gods, are we? We're talking about physical, like the land and water, in the human sense. And Osiris, soil, remains virginal or renewed each year. What is that? What's that meant to mean? What is she actually even stating there? That the land, the soil remains virginal, and this is how she's showing virgin birth, or it's renewed each year. Okay, and that's from her book. The statement of Acaria there, that Osiris remains virgin or renewed each year, is another important piece of information that we cannot overlook, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. So the Egyptians have a legend that the end of Osiris's life came on the 17th of the month, on which day. So this is Plutarch again. Sorry, I should have brought up the slide. This is another story of the birth of Osiris, of Horus. The Egyptians have a legend that the end of Osiris's life came on the 17th of the month, on which day it is quite evident to the eye that the period of the full moon is over because of this. The Pythagoreans call this day the barrier and utterly abominate this number. For the number 17 coming in between the square 16 and the oblong rectangle 18, which, as it happens, are the only plane figures that their parameters equal to their areas, bars them from off from each other, and disjoins them and breaks up the ratio of height to 8 to 8 and an eighth by its division into in equal intervals. Yeah, okay, Plutarch, whatever. And actually, I have got the rest of it. Some say that the years of Osiris's life were those 17, that the years of his, and some say that it was the years of his reign, were 28. For that is the number of the moon's illuminations, and in that number of days does the complete her cycle. The wood which they cut on the occasions called the burials of Osiris, they fashion into a crescent-shaped coffer because of the fact that the moon, when it comes near to the sun, becomes crescent-shaped and disappears from our sight. The dismemberment of Osiris into 14 parts, they refer allegorically to the days of the waning of the satellite from the time of the full moon to the new moon. Whatever, Plutarch. It is worthy of note that in his writings, Plutarch, one of the main sources of information used by Acaria S, right? In all of those writings, he never once, so he's given us all different versions of this story, and these are only Plutarch's stories, and he's one of the main sources of information used by Acaria S. Plutarch never once refers to Isis as a virgin. All right, when she created that virginity, when it was the Nile and the land, and that was her what stated, oh, this is the virginity. It's like it's renewed each year. That's not what Plutarch stated. It doesn't necessitate, of course, that he didn't understand Osiris to be a virgin. But he doesn't call her that. He never once uses that language of her. Right, okay. So, in 1799, the Rosetta Stone was discovered. And this was a major turning point in our ability to understand the Egyptian hieroglyphs. And with this new ability to translate the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs came a better understanding of what the ancient Egyptians believed. Right? No longer were we reliant almost entirely on ancient writers such as Plutarch, but we could now go directly to the sources themselves. right? The hieroglyphs of the ancient Egyptians, of which they are three main source materials: the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead. Right now, so this is the hieroglyphs. So you have at the top, you have, so this stone was created or is found in 1799. Okay, so you have the hieroglyphs, then you have demotic, which is a later adaptation of the Egyptian language. All right, and then you have the Greek. So they used the Greek to understand what the hieroglyphs at the top were actually stating. So you can translate from the Greek into hieroglyphs. You can understand what the hieroglyphs were about. All right, and so now people were able to understand what the actual text states. So they can now go and study the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead. Right, which they weren't able to do before. All right, so this is the coffin. This is coffin texts, and all of this is kind of, there's stories and depictions in the coffin texts. All right, so over the coffins they have these fascinating stories that are stated, and if you've seen the pyramid texts as well, it's very much like this type of thing. So we had no idea how to decipher this before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. And so once we were able to I'm talking, I didn't do anything. The very studied men and people and women who have deciphered these, and now can read what these actually state. And when we now can have a much better idea of what the ancient stories themselves stated. Move over, Plutarch. You don't need to worry about a first and second century source. We can now go to the text direct, a first source, direct source. So in one of these coffin texts, it states, taking shape as a falcon, the lightning flash strikes, the gods are afraid. Isis wakes pregnant with the seed of her brother Osiris. She is uplifted, the widow, and her heart is glad with the seed of her brother Osiris. She says, "O you gods, I am Isis, the sister of Osiris, who wept for the father of the gods, even Osiris, who judged the slaughterings of the two lands. His seed is within my womb. I have molded the shape of the god with the egg as my son, who is at the head of the Ennead, which what he shall rule is this land, the heritage of his grandfather Geb. What he shall say is concerning his father. What he shall kill is Seth, the enemy of his father Osiris. Come, ye gods, protect him within my womb, for he is known in your hearts. He is your Lord, this God who is in his egg, blue-haired of form, Lord of the gods, and great and beautiful are the veins of the two blue plumes." So that's a direct source. That's the coffin text. All right. So, but on closer examination of that text, all right, we will see that it states it doesn't affirm or deny sexual intercourse between Isis and Osiris. All this actually depicts is that after Isis took the form of a falcon, there was a lightning strike, which would seem to have made the gods afraid. Isis is then stated as having awoken pregnant. While it could be asserted that it was by way of the lightning strike that made her pregnant, the text doesn't state that. Rather, we are explicitly told that she was pregnant with the seed of her brother Osiris, which would be more, certainly would support a sexual union between them. So we have seed of her brother Osiris, and we have seed through there. So it would kind of support some kind of sexual union. But it's certainly, even if you were talking about non-sexual, we're still talking about a seed of the brother of Osiris. It is Osiris's child. Now, in another source, we see Isis declaring that she had conceived a child, Horus, by her husband. And so this is another ancient Egyptian text, the narrative of Osiris, 168. I am Isis, who conceived a child by her husband, and she became heavy with Horus, the divine child. I gave birth to Horus, the son of Osiris, in a nest of papyrus plants. All right. Again, there is not any specific statement of sexual intercourse. Her statement regarding having conceived by a child by her husband would certainly imply that. But it's certainly Osiris is the father. In another a text, this is the great hymn to Osiris. Right, and this is the text that then gets used about the mating with the this phallus. So when we were told about the story, when she finds these 14 or she finds 13 of Osiris's parts, and then she has sex with this the phallus that she creates. This is the story that is then used to create this modern myth, which Plutarch didn't state, but is now stated in modern mythology about Osiris. So, right here. She flew around and around over this earth, uttering wailing cries of grief. And she did not alight on the ground until she had found him. So Osiris is actually being killed, right? She made light to come forth from her feathers. She made air to come into being by means of her two wings. And she cried out the death cries of her brother. She made to rise up the helpless members of him, whose heart was at rest. So she's rising up the members of him, of this dead brother, Osiris. She drew from him his essence, right? And she made therefrom an heir. She suckled the child in solitariness, and none knew where his place was. And he grew in strength. His hand is mighty or victorious within the house. So this is a different story, because in this story, Osiris hasn't been cut up. All right. He's died. He's been killed, but he hasn't been cut up. And she makes his penis, his member, rise, and she draws from him his essence. All right. And she is made pregnant from this. This story is a modern insertion into the 14, the cutting of the 14 parts, where she consecrated that. So it was kind of like it became sacred place where she found these 14 parts and where she found his penis. It wasn't that she had sex with this part. That's from this part. That's been mingled in and created this modern myth. So it's just complete. It's just amalgamation of all of these stories to create this modern myth that really doesn't actually exist anywhere in the texts, anywhere in history. Isn't even told by Plutarch, but this is now told in a different way in one of the pyramid texts. And now, so even Plutarch doesn't state this. Now modern people will say that. And you'll see when we do the two Babylons, that gets used constantly in order to link God with God with God and link them all together and people. So this text with the hymn to Osiris, you can find it on this is where you will find it. It's from the 18th dynasty. It's an Egyptian, obviously, text, and it's found in the stela of Amenmose in the Louvre, C286. You'll find that actual text. And actually, there is. You can actually, if you just go onto Wikipedia, you'll find a link to that as well. So the 18th dynasty dates from 1550 to or 1549 BC to 1292 BC. So that's when this text is dated to, somewhere between those dates. Right, and that's where that story actually comes from. And what you'll notice in that story is there's no cutting up, right, piecing back together, finding 14 pieces. That doesn't happen in this story. But the rising of the member and the drawing of essence does. But obviously this story predates anything that Plutarch is quoted or created or copied or made. I don't know what Plutarch actually did in order to create those stories. But yeah, this predates, and it isn't what Plutarch stated. So the translation, yeah, here is, so that's the text. That there on the Wikipedia page is the translation of that specific text that you can actually go to. It's in fact, I should, for reasons of clarity, because you won't be able to see it, but it's in Wiktionary.org. Great hymn to Osiris, and you can see the Egyptian hieroglyphics at the top, and then it's got the translation into it. And I will make that bigger. This is the part you probably won't even be able to see that properly. But the English there is, so this is the actual translation in this website that you'll find, that it says, who raised the limpness of the weary-hearted, who took in his water, and they have semen in brackets there, so that's actually their interpretation of what water means, who made an heir, who suckled the child in solitude, and his location was unknown, who introduced him when his arm grew strong into the hall of Geb. So this is understanding this to be sperm, a semen, a creation of Osiris and Isis. Now, while the text again doesn't specifically refer to sexual intercourse, it is implied, and what is clear, that the conception, however the conception happens, Osiris is considered the father of Horus, and it is his seed that Isis has conceived. This is not the same as the story of Jesus. Jesus has no biological human father. Joseph is not the biological father of Jesus. Mary received no semen from a man in her conception. That's the virgin birth. That's what the virgin, whether you believe it or not, the virgin birth, and some Christians do and some Christians don't, doesn't matter. We're only dealing with we're not dealing here whether the virgin birth is factual or not. We're dealing with the story of it. And if the virgin birth story states that there was no semen, there was no man involved in that conception. That is not what we see in these other the Egyptian stories. So it must also be noted that none of the texts, just as Plutarch states, no reference to virginity is stated at all. There's no statement here that Isis is a virgin. It's not asserted or even implied. Even if we did accept that the sexual intercourse was not involved in this conception of Horus in this story, this would only require the conception to be won by miraculous means. It would not necessitate a virgin conception at all, as there is no mention of Isis being a virgin at the time that she conceived. She may have already had sex, didn't conceive, and then conceived when he was dead through this, this other way of other means. But there's no virginity involved in the stories. Right, okay, so there is one Egyptian text that Ikaria S cites as evidence that Isis is called a virgin. This text is an inscription found in the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, which dates to the 13th century BC, where she asserts that Isis is being called the Great Virgin. In this text, okay? So, this is something that you'll see on her on that Stella website. This is her claim that there is a virgin birth and that Isis is being called the Great Virgin. But something to note is that even in the image, this image is from her site. Even in this image used by Ikaria S, it is translated using the word maiden, not virgin. We then see at the bottom, so we have the word maiden here, right? And then we have, at the bottom, we have synonyms. And the synonyms there with one round, the virgin. But if we go to Merriam-Webster's definition of maiden, right, it's an unmarried girl or woman, a former Scottish beheading device resembling the guillotine, not married, virgin, right? So yes, the maiden can mean virgin, but you don't get to automatically say that maiden means virgin because you want it to. That's not how things work. You can't automatically just say, right, well, this is the synonym. This is the definition that is being used in this text. You have to go through. There are things that you need to do in order to prove that. You can't just assert it. The Egyptian Hanut, right, does not mean virgin. And that is the Hanut, which is in this text. It's the HUN -T, Hanut. It does not mean virgin. It means maiden, which is why even in the source that Ikaria S has cited, it does not read virgin, but it reads maiden, because Hanut means maiden. Now, maiden can mean virgin, but it doesn't necessitate that it must mean virgin. As you can see by the source, they've just simply selected that and highlighted that to be a reference to virgin. Now, in another article, online article, Ikaria S cites, this is where we're going to go back to the Egyptologist, Dr. Reginald E. Witt's book, Isis in the Ancient World, as support. She's going to use this now as support for Isis being the Great Virgin. Right? So he's already argued a kind of against because the star, because he asserts that the Egyptians associated Isis with the dog star Sothis and not the constellation Virgo. But now she's going to cite this Reginald E. Witt because he now apparently he's going to support her claim. So she'll cite him now because obviously that's important. And it says, this is from page 273 of his book. The Egyptian goddess, who was equally the great virgin, Khunut, and mother of the god, was the object of the very same praise bestowed upon her successor, Mary, Virgin Mother of Jesus. Akaria S. also cites this passage by Dr. Witt in her book, Christ in Egypt, and that's on page 92. So she cites it in a number of places. Okay, but Dr. Witt certainly does refer to Isis as a great virgin. There's no question about it. Here he is calling her the great virgin, right? Hnut. But, and this is a rather important note to make, Dr. Witt also states on page 18 of his book that the legend of Isis and Osiris is based on perfect sexual union. The legend of Isis and Osiris is founded on perfect sexual union and perfect motherhood. Their mating is said to have taken place in the womb of their own mother, Nut, goddess of the sky. And that is on page 18 of his book. So, while Dr. Witt clearly stated that Isis is called a great virgin, he also clearly states that the legend of Osiris and Isis is based on perfect sexual union. Either Dr. Witt had forgotten what he had written on page 18 by the time he had got to page 273, he contradicted himself deliberately, or he understood great virgin to not refer to physical virginity in relation to the actual sexual intercourse. All right? He clearly understood great virgin in a different way than somebody that was a virgin through not having sexual intercourse, because he clearly states that they had sexual intercourse. So his usage of this great virgin, we must understand what he is meaning by great virgin. You can't just simply say, right, okay, I'm going to rip this from context of what he's actually stating, right? And I'm not going to bother reading page 18 because that completely goes against me. I'm just going to read page 273 and I'm going to cite that page. In her book, Christ in Egypt, Akaria S. makes note that that Gerhard Johannes Botterweck asserted that this Hnut was not virginity, but rather perpetual virginity. All right, and this is Akaria S. herself, writing in her book. Apparently, in order to explain how these various goddesses can remain virgins after becoming mothers, Botterweck et al., which means and others, conclude that the virginity indicated by Hnut is not virginity at all. A distinction seemingly forced, as she's saying, that would be unnecessary if the mythological and astrotheological nature of the stories were understood. And this perpetual virginity comprehended as a mystery, as it is within Christianity. Indeed, Jesus' mother, Mary, was said to be a perpetual virgin, explaining why she could give birth yet remain virginal. Virtually the same as these other virgin mothers discussed here. Really? The same? I don't think so. For one, the Bible doesn't say that Mary remained a perpetual virgin. And secondly, even in the Catholic understanding of perpetual virginity, there is no sex involved. There's no sexual union. The Catholics believe that Mary did not have sex before or after she conceived and had Jesus. So her perpetual virginity in even in Catholicism, is indicated by non-sex or abstinence from sexual union. She does not have sex, even in what I would say is an incorrect understanding of Mary. I believe that she had other children after, but that's kind of irrelevant here because we're not dealing with that. Even if we said that Mary was a perpetual virgin, we are saying that in the sense that she did not have sex at all. That would be the perpetual virginity, even in Catholicism. That's not the same as what the Great Virgin, it would seem, is a reference to perpetual virginity, regardless of whether or not consummation was involved in that conception, or at any other time. Perpetual virginity is not the same as physical virginity. Now take a look at what Acaria S, a closer look at what Acaria S actually states. Right. When she was talking about the Great Virgin, she states, as often the case with mythical figures, despite the way she is impregnated, Isis remained the Great Virgin. Despite the way that she is impregnated, Isis remained the Great Virgin. Right? So she's remained a perpetual virgin regardless of whether she's had sex or not. That is not the same as saying that a virgin birth, because this doesn't necessitate that she never had sex before. It doesn't, and it's not saying that she didn't have sex after. Right? Even in the Christian thing, this is a completely different thing to say perpetual virginity, because she remains a virgin regardless of whether she has sex or not, and actual virginity. They're not the same thing. And as a non-Catholic, I actually don't believe that Mary was a perpetual virgin. So actually what she's doing is she's arguing against Catholicism, or the belief of of Catholicism, and maybe some non-Catholic Christians as well. Maybe they believe that is the perpetual virginity of Mary, but we're talking about non-sex at all. We're not talking about somebody that Mary had sex but remains a perpetual virgin. Those are not the same thing. They're completely different representations of what virgin we're talking about. As Acaria S is clearly aware that there is not one single way in which Isis is recorded as having conceived, as has already been demonstrated, yet she remained the Great Virgin. This does not mean that she was viewed as not having engaged in sexual intercourse. Rather, she remained a virgin regardless of whether she did or didn't. So let us go back again to Acaria S and her statement. I said that we'd come back to this one about the Nile and Osiris. When she says the impression is given from the text that it is the description of the Nile Osiris overflowing its banks, spreading its seed on the land, Isis. In order to create Horus, we are also not discussing sexual intercourse in the human sense, obviously. And Isis' soil remains virginal or renewed each year. Renewed. She remains virginal or is renewed each year. This, even in allegorical imagery, is not depicting an actual virginity, but rather a renewed one, a perpetual virginity. Isis has been linked to the goddess Hera. All right? In the book Classical Mythology by Morford and Leonardon, they appeal to Apuleius to show that Isis is linked to Hera. I do apologize if this is if hopefully you're following along. It has been a long study, and we're only dealing with the first two parts, the two claims at the moment. We haven't even dealt with any of the others. All right, Sabile, Athena, Aphrodite, Artemis, Demeter, Persephone, Hera, the ancient queens of heaven and earth are here. That through the process of synchronism included in the great Egyptian goddess Isis. Apuleius, whose evidence is almost certainly reliable, shows us how in the 2nd century, he was born about AD 120, the figures of Greek and Roman mythology had given way to the idea of a single divine power. And that's on page 284 of their book. Hera was understood to be a perpetual virgin. This is despite the fact that she was married to Zeus, and they are depicted as having many children together. All right, Pausanias, all these names and the conflation and how that we have to get to all of these. All right, that's the classical mythology. Pausanias, a 2nd century AD, post-Christ writers. Pausanias, a 2nd century AD traveler and geographer, claimed that she renewed her virginity once a year by bathing in a spring called the Canothus. Right, 50 states, I conjecture, from Temenium is Nuplia, which is the present day is uninhabited. Its founder is Nucleus, reputed to be the son of Poseidon and Amimone. Of the walls too, ruins still remain, and in Nuplia are a sanctuary of Poseidon harbors and a spring called Canathus. There, say the Argives, Hera bathes every year and recovers her maidenhood. So she has a bath once a year and recovers her maidenhood. Now, this is probably in usage of virginity, in perpetual virginity, right? But it could just be her youthfulness, which would kind of indicate that the virginity kind of comes along with that as well. Right. But as for the appeal to Apuleius as a reliable source of evidence, so we've already seen that they appeal to Apuleius in that book as a reliable source of evidence, right? And what he states in that book, it's called the Golden Ass. It's talking about a donkey, not something else. We're talking about donkey, ass in that sense. It's considered to be a picaresque novel. In fact, it is considered to be the precursor to that genre of writing. The Golden Ass is actually I don't think I've got a picture of it up, but that's the story. The Golden Ass. This is the one that they're referring to. Apuleius. I'm not even sure how to say his name, but that's who they're referring to, and it is a picaresque novel. It's being called a picaresque novel, and it's being called the precursor to that. So, from that website, from Wikipedia.org, which is that site, obviously, at the top there you'll read this. The text is a precursor to the literary genre of the episodic picaresque novel, in which Franco de Quevedo, Francois Rabelais, Giovanni Boccaccio, Miguel de Cervantes, Voltaire, Daniel Defoe. I can say Daniel Defoe. Wow. And many others have followed. All right. Anybody knows Daniel Defoe? Writings, Voltaire specifically. I'm not too sure of the others, but Daniel Defoe and Voltaire I'm certainly familiar with. So what is a picaresque novel? Okay, from Wikipedia, the same site, Wikipedia. It depicts the adventures of a roguish but appealing hero, usually of low social class, who lives by his wits in a corrupt society. Picaresque novels typically adopt a realistic style. They are often some elements of comedy and satire. While the term picaresque novel was only coined in 1810, the picaresque novel originated in Imperial Rome, dating during the 1st and 2nd century CE, in particular with works such as the Satyricon, or satire of Petronius, and later, and more particularly with authors such as Apuleius in Roman Numidia. It's a book of fiction. Right? It's a fictional book. This is the source that they're using as a source of factual information. It's a novel. Taking on realistic terms, it's a Dan Brown style book. So it is a book that is presented as being reliable and some kind of realistic sense, but it is a novel. It's not, and it's got comedy and satire inside of it. So it's to use this the Golden Ass as these did in order to link Hera with Isis, and Hera being a perpetual virgin, which Pausanias states. How the web, how one's got to be linked to another, and this and that, and just you've got to take from here and take from there and take from here in order to create this complete and utter mismatch of facts, which just don't end up being facts. Perpetual virginity is not an actual thing. You cannot be a virgin after sex. Even if that title is bestowed upon someone who has had sex, if you just say they're a perpetual virgin, it doesn't have any meaning to it. It's just something that you're saying. It's completely different than saying somebody is a virgin. While a person or deity may be regarded as such, in reality, they're not. This then is an attribute, an epithet, all right, rather than having any literal meaning to it. This also is not the same as saying Mary was a virgin. Mary was not considered a virgin after she had sex, or a perpetual virgin. And even in the virginity of that in Catholicism, it's not referring to as somebody that has had sex. The virginity of Mary is a direct reference to her sexual status at the time of conception, not after anyway, right? So even if she has sex or she doesn't have sex after, is irrelevant. It is a direct reference to when she conceived. So the tradition of Mary may be considered perpetual virgin. It doesn't matter, but it doesn't even mean the same thing. In the Catholic tradition, Mary is considered a perpetual virgin after she has given birth and from then on. She never consummated that marriage with Joseph in Catholicism. But the Bible texts in no way do depict Mary as having somehow remained a virgin after she has had sex. Those are two different things. So the perpetual virginity of Isis, Hera, whatever name we're being linked one god to another god in order to make Hera is a perpetual virgin. Isis is linked to Hera, so Isis is a perpetual virgin. Even in that, even if Hera was a perpetual virgin, you can't just say Isis is a perpetual virgin. You have to link Isis through Hera in order to create the perpetual virginity of Isis. And that's how this web has been woven. That is how, if we go back to the original statements of these two, the Isis and Horus. Isis is being called a virgin, or Horus is being born of a virgin, and Horus is being born on the 25th of December. And that's how, not hard, is it, in order to be able to create that? That's how it's done. Slightly different than the Christian biblical texts, but if you are able to weave all of that together, and that's only dealing with two parts, and that's probably not even taken all of the information that I could have done. You can create the fact, you can state a Horus was born on the 25th of December, and you can say that Horus was born of a virgin, and that's easily done. So there you go. That's all you need to do. Okay, so that is two parts of the claims against the story of Jesus, and Jesus being a copy somehow of the story of Horus. What story of Horus where the Jesus is a copy of is a fictional story. I mean, the stories are fictional of Horus anyway, but we're even arguing against a fictional story, a story that didn't even exist at the time of Jesus, after Jesus, before Jesus. None of those stories about Horus that we see today, none of them are the story of Horus and Osiris. They're all later embellishments, creations, and the one that is presented as facts by Akaria S. and Zeitgeist is there is no story. There's just nothing to say that you can say a Jesus story is a copy of that story, because that story never existed. That is the creation of somebody like now. But that's basically the information. I know I've nearly gone for 3 hours, and I really appreciate anybody that's stayed about and watched the whole thing. I appreciate that, and those that have been obviously in and out and watching, and will watch this on a playback or something. I really, as always, I'm very, very appreciated of you to come in. Hopefully the information that I've presented, even if you weren't taken in by these stories, at least you can see how they have been created, and you can see the manipulation that needs to be done in order to create that story that can then be used against Jesus. And this is the kind of story that mythicists are arguing to say, well, Jesus didn't exist because of this particular kind of argument, and that atheists are then using against Christians. Atheists are they, what are they studying? How are they coming to this information? Are they just reading Acaria S, or maybe a couple of quotes of Acaria S, or watching Zeitgeist and going, well, those are facts. They must be true because they're in a video, they're in a book, so they must be facts. And then going, right, okay, well, that disproves Christianity. And if that is the way that atheists are actually arguing against, you can automatically tell that they are clearly not studied the subject in any great depth. Now, you don't need to have studied it in the kind of depths that have been presented here. This is kind of only for those that either want to kind of solidify their faith, want to be able to argue against those that are presenting these arguments, or maybe somebody that is interested to see whether the information presented in those in those books, in those videos, in those memes that you see in Facebook and places, whether those are actually factually true. I think that the vast majority of people who are atheists are not going to sit through this video and look at the evidence that I've presented. And I understand it's 3 hours long. There's a lot of information. It's been, I would say, it's complicated because the story is complicated, because it's a story that is had to be merged together, amalgamated, created. So, but for those that want to just, study deeper, those that want to, look at those arguments and say, well, I know now that those are factually incorrect. So that's what my study's for. It's just to help people, whether you believe them or not. I just want to help people try and kind of become more solid in their own faith and not have to take in these or even have any doubts about these kind of claims that people are making against Christianity. So that's all this is for. But I really do appreciate everybody that has come in. Doki, thank you very much for the donation. It is appreciated. It's there for people that want to help support my work and stuff. But my work, as always, this study will be available on my website. It's obviously available on YouTube. It's free of charge. I present it to people. I don't expect anything from it. It touches me a lot that somebody that people do help and do donate to my work, and anybody that does, I appreciate you so much. And I'm not doing it for that. But it is appreciated, obviously. But yeah, I really do appreciate everybody that just watches the video, takes the time out. I do put a lot of effort into these studies in order to try and help people, and I just appreciate people coming and watching them, whether you watch 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 hours. I appreciate everybody that stops by, and I just hope that the information that I present to people is useful for them, and that it's either interesting to them, or that they can then, if it helps somebody become more solid in their faith, that's what it's for. If they can help somebody else, they can point somebody to this stream, or they can go and help somebody else and solidify their faith, or they can show somebody who's an atheist, look, your arguments against Christianity are wrong because the facts that you're being presented with are not facts at all. And if you they can see that the information that is being presented against Christianity is actually false, manipulated, and deliberately so, in order to turn people away from it, right? Because that's what you cannot create this story if you're not deliberately trying to create it, right? Because it's not there. You have to put it together. So you are deliberately doing this to try and turn people away from Christianity. You are trying. That is the point. What you're trying to do. There's no other point for this. You are trying to turn people away from their faith, right? And you're being dishonest about doing it in the means that you're doing it. If the things that you were saying were at least true, that would be one thing. But while you are trying to manipulate the texts, while you are trying to deceive Christians and turn them away from their faith, I have a problem with that. And that's what this is for. That's why I do these studies, in order to help Christians solidify their faith, their understanding of what the Bible says, and what the attackers are doing in order to try to turn them away. Right? Because I'm positive that Zeitgeist has turned Christians away. There's no question about it. People have been swayed by this argumentation by Acaria S. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be huge amounts of people, but if they turn one person away, right, that is one person who is lost. That's not through deception. The devil is out there. He's searching for those that he can manipulate, and this is the kind of ways that he's doing it. So, yeah, that's why I do these studies. I enjoy them. It's something I do for myself, but I like to present them to other people. And I'm so it humbles me that somebody would take the time to watch a 3-hour presentation that I present. So yeah, thank you very much. And it really doesn't mean a lot to me. Every single person that supports me, whether I tell them directly or not, it doesn't matter. I appreciate it. So thank you very much for watching. Look forward to the next 3 hours on part 2, where we look at 2 more things. I might try and speed it up, because this was important to show you how it's done, and so now people will be able to see how it's done. The next video, all I need to kind of maybe it won't be as long, and maybe I can get through a little bit more information on the next one, and some more of those points that but just know that those other points, Jesus died, the Horus having 12 disciples, dying, rising again, crucified, all of those are done in exactly the same way as what we've just seen. The manipulation is strong. So I'm not going to hold you any longer. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video. Appreciate it.